It all started with something so small, so seemingly insignificant, that I almost dismissed it as my own paranoia. It was a Tuesday evening when she first mentioned it. Her voice casual, almost too casual. "I think I'll go for a walk tonight," she said, tying her hair into a loose ponytail. She grabbed her sneakers from the closet and slipped them on without looking at me. I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. My wife, Sarah, wasn't one for evening strolls. In fact, she rarely exercised at all unless it was a morning yoga session or an occasional weekend hike. But here she was, suddenly announcing this newfound habit of night runs. Something about the way she said it made my stomach churn, a tiny, nagging feeling I couldn't quite place. "Night runs?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Since when do you run at night?" She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Oh, just trying to mix things up, clear my head after work." Her tone was light, cheerful even, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a fraction of a second where she looked like she wanted to say more but stopped herself. And then she left. I stood by the window, watching her disappear down the street. The air felt heavy, suffocating somehow. I told myself I was overthinking it, that people change their routines all the time. But the unease lingered long after she was gone. When she returned an hour later, flushed and slightly out of breath, I greeted her with a smile. "How was your run?" I asked, forcing warmth into my voice. "It was nice," she replied, brushing past me toward the bathroom. "Really refreshing." But as she closed the door behind her, I noticed something odd. There was no sweat on her forehead, not even a drop. And her shoes? They looked suspiciously clean, as though they hadn't touched pavement at all. That's when the cracks began to form. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet suspicion. Sarah continued her night runs, always leaving around the same time, just after dinner, and returning exactly an hour later. Each time, she seemed more distant, her answers shorter, her smiles thinner. I tried to engage her in conversation, to ask about her day or how her run went, but she deflected every question with vague responses. "Did you go far tonight?" I asked one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter as she poured herself a glass of water. "Not really," she said quickly, not meeting my gaze. "Just around the block." But I knew she wasn't telling the truth. For starters, she never ran around the block. Our neighborhood was well lit and bustling with families. It wasn't exactly the kind of place someone would jog for exercise. And yet, she kept insisting that's where she went. One night, unable to shake the growing unease, I decided to follow her. It felt wrong, like I was betraying some unspoken trust, but I couldn't help myself. As soon as she stepped out the door, I grabbed my coat and slipped outside, keeping a safe distance behind her. At first, everything seemed normal. She walked briskly down the street, turning corners with purpose. But then, something strange happened. Instead of heading toward the park or any of the usual spots people might jog, she veered off onto a side road, a narrow, dimly lit path that led away from our neighborhood entirely. My heart began to race. Where was she going? And why? I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as she crossed through a small wooded area and emerged onto a quieter street lined with old brick buildings. Finally, she stopped in front of a cozy-looking coffee shop tucked into the corner of the block. Its sign read Brew Haven, glowing faintly under the soft yellow light of the awning. Sarah hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. I stood frozen, my mind reeling. A coffee shop? At this hour? What possible reason could she have for coming here during her so-called runs? My chest tightened, and I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. Something wasn't right. Something far beyond what I had initially suspected. For a while, I debated whether to confront her right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe it was the need to know the full truth before doing anything rash. Instead, I turned around and walked home, my thoughts spiraling out of control. By the time Sarah returned, humming softly as if nothing were amiss, I had already made up my mind. I needed proof. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Sarah walking into that coffee shop replayed in my mind like a broken record. Who was she meeting there? Why had she lied to me about her evening runs? The questions gnawed at me, relentless and suffocating. By morning, I knew what I had to do. While Sarah showered and got ready for work, I quietly installed a tracking app on her phone, a simple program designed to log GPS data without her knowledge. It felt invasive, yes, but desperation clouded my judgment. I told myself it was justified. After all, if she had nothing to hide, then why the secrecy? The day dragged on agonizingly slow. At work, I found myself distracted, staring blankly at spreadsheets while my thoughts wandered back to Sarah. What would the tracker reveal? Would it confirm my worst fears, or give me peace of mind? When evening came, Sarah announced another run. This time, however, I didn't follow her. Instead, I waited anxiously at home, refreshing the tracking app every few minutes. The map showed her leaving our neighborhood, retracing the same route from the other night. My stomach churned as the blinking, representing her location, stopped once again near Brewhaven. But this time, it didn't stay there for long. To my shock, the dot began moving again, farther away from the coffee shop, deeper into an unfamiliar part of town. My pulse quickened as I watched her path zigzag through side streets until finally stopping at a small park nestled between two apartment complexes. What was she doing there? Unable to resist any longer, I grabbed my keys and drove to the location. When I arrived, I parked a safe distance away and approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded a cluster of trees, I saw them. Sarah was sitting on a bench beside a man I didn't recognize. They weren't holding hands or embracing, not overtly, but their body language said everything. He leaned toward her, speaking softly, while she laughed at something he said. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, not since before life's stresses had worn us both down. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My knees nearly buckled beneath me as reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. Betrayal, deceit, lies upon lies. All those nights she claimed to be clearing her head, she'd been sneaking off to meet him. I wanted to scream, to march over and demand answers, but I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my throat tight with unspoken rage. Tears stung my eyes, blurring my vision as I watched them talk and laugh together, oblivious to my presence. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. As I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a ring. A diamond ring. He held it up, saying something I couldn't hear from where I stood, and Sarah's expression shifted instantly. She looked shocked, hesitant, and then, slowly, she nodded. My world shattered. Without thinking, I turned and stumbled back to my car, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands trembled violently as I gripped the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. How could she do this to me? To us? Everything we built together. All the promises, the dreams, the love. It was all a lie. For hours, I drove aimlessly, consumed by anger and despair. By the time I returned home, Sarah was already in bed, feigning sleep. I stared at her silhouette in the darkness, feeling nothing but cold emptiness. She may have thought she fooled me, but now I knew the truth, and I wouldn't let her get away with it. Not without paying a price. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and calculated thoughts. I couldn't look at Sarah the same way anymore. Every smile she gave me felt like a dagger. Every touch was laced with betrayal. But outwardly, I remained calm, too calm, perhaps. I masked my pain with silence, retreating into myself as I plotted my next move. I knew I couldn't confront her. Not yet. If I did, she'd deny everything, twist the narrative to make herself the victim. No, I needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for excuses or lies. And so, I began gathering it piece by piece. First, I delved deeper into her phone. Using the tracking app, I mapped out her movements over the past weeks, noting each visit to Brewhaven and the park where I'd seen her with him. I even discovered text messages hidden in a deleted folder, a trail of affectionate words exchanged between them. "Can't wait to see you tonight," one read. Another simply said, "You're all I think about." Each message felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. My hands shook as I scrolled through them, but I forced myself to keep going. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about justice. She had chosen him over me, shattered the life we'd built together, and now she would face the consequences. But how? That question haunted me. What form should my revenge take? Should I expose her deceit publicly, humiliate her in front of friends and family? Or should I strike closer to home, targeting the fragile trust she thought she still held with others? The possibilities swirled in my mind, each darker than the last. Then, late one night, inspiration struck. It came to me as I sat alone in the dim glow of my laptop, staring blankly at photos of happier times. Photos of us smiling, laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. An idea formed, cold and calculated, like frost creeping across glass. If Sarah wanted a new life with this man, then I would give her exactly that, but on my terms. The plan unfolded in my mind with chilling clarity. First, I would create an illusion, a perfect facade of forgiveness and acceptance. I'd act as though I suspected nothing, lulling her into a false sense of security. Then, when the moment was right, I'd dismantle everything she cared about, leaving her with nothing but the ruins of her choices. It was cruel, yes? Heartless, even. But betrayal breeds cruelty, and I was done playing the role of the wounded fool. Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. I started small, surprising Sarah with little gestures. A bouquet of flowers left on the kitchen counter, a note expressing gratitude for all she did. At first, she seemed confused, even wary, but gradually, she relaxed. Her guard dropped, and she began treating me with the same casual indifference she always had. Inside, I seethed. Each kind word I spoke felt like acid burning my tongue, but I swallowed it down, knowing the payoff would be worth it. One evening, as we sat together on the couch watching TV, I broached the subject carefully. "You know," I said, keeping my tone light, "you've been spending a lot of time on your runs lately. Are you sure you're not pushing yourself too hard?" She glanced at me, startled by the sudden interest. "Oh, no, I'm fine," she replied quickly, forcing a laugh. "It's just nice to get some fresh air, you know?" I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. "Well, maybe next time you go, I'll join you. We could use some quality time together." Her eyes widened slightly, panic flickering across her face before she masked it with a smile. "Sure, that sounds great," she said, though her voice wavered. "We'll have to plan it soon." As she turned back to the screen, I allowed myself a grim smile. She didn't realize it yet, but she just walked straight into my trap. Phase 1 was complete. Now, it was time to tighten the noose. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, for both of us, though Sarah didn't know it yet. I continued to play the role of the doting, oblivious husband, showering her with small acts of kindness and feigned interest in her life. Each gesture was calculated, designed to lower her defenses while I worked behind the scenes to gather more evidence. I began accompanying her on some of her evening runs, insisting that we spend more time together. At first, she resisted, citing excuses about needing alone time or preferring different routes. But I persisted, gently nudging until she relented. Together, we walked through our neighborhood, side by side, pretending everything was normal. She chatted idly about work and mundane topics, careful not to reveal too much. Meanwhile, I observed every detail. The way her pace quickened when we passed certain streets, the subtle tension in her shoulders whenever I suggested turning down unfamiliar paths. It became clear that she was avoiding specific areas I now knew led to Brewhaven and the park where she met him. Her evasiveness only fueled my resolve. If she thought she could keep lying to me, she was wrong. One evening, as we strolled along a quiet street bathed in the golden light of sunset, I decided to test her further. "You know," I said casually, glancing at her profile, "I've been thinking about taking up running myself. Maybe we could make this a regular thing, just you and me." She hesitated, her steps faltering slightly. "That sounds nice," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "But don't you think it might get boring after a while?" "Not if we switch up the route," I countered smoothly, watching her reaction closely. "There are so many places we haven't explored yet. Like that little coffee shop I saw the other day. It looked cozy. Have you ever been there?" Her face paled, just for a moment, before she forced a laugh. "Oh no, I don't think so. I usually stick to the same loop, you know how it is." I smiled inwardly. Gotcha. To anyone else, the exchange might have seemed innocent enough. A casual conversation between two people rediscovering shared interests. But beneath the surface, it was a game of cat and mouse, each word loaded with hidden meaning. And I was winning. As the days turned into weeks, I deepened my investigation. Using the tracking app, I monitored her movements meticulously, noting patterns and inconsistencies. I also began researching the man from the park, the one who had dared to offer her a ring. His name was Daniel, I discovered, a freelance graphic designer in his early 30s who lived in a modest apartment near the park. Social media painted him as charming and carefree, with photos of exotic vacations and witty captions that screamed midlife crisis. But what struck me most was how ordinary he seemed. How dare someone so unremarkable waltz into my life and steal away the woman I loved? It made my blood boil. With each new piece of information, my plan crystallized further. I would expose their affair, not just to Sarah, but to everyone they cared about. Friends, family, colleagues. They would all know the truth. By the time I was done, neither of them would have anywhere left to hide. But first, I needed leverage. Something undeniable. Something that would leave them powerless to deny their betrayal. And then, one fateful afternoon, I found it. While digging through Sarah's emails, a task that left me feeling both guilty and vindicated, I stumbled upon a draft message addressed to Daniel. In it, she confessed her fears about being caught, expressing doubt about whether leaving me was the right decision. But what caught my attention most was the attachment, a photo of the two of them together, taken during one of their secret meetings. They stood close, smiling warmly, their connection undeniable. My hands trembled as I downloaded the image onto my laptop. This was it, the smoking gun I'd been searching for. With this evidence in hand, I could destroy them both. Yet, even as triumph surged within me, a darker thought took root. Exposing their affair wouldn't be enough. Not for what they had done to me. No, I wanted more than revenge. I wanted control. I wanted to watch them squirm, to see the life drain from their eyes as they realized they had lost everything. And so, I devised the final stage of my plan. It would require patience, precision, and an iron will. But I was ready. For too long, I had been the victim. Now, it was my turn to strike. The pieces were falling into place. All that remained was to set the trap and wait for them to walk straight into it. With the damning photo in my possession, I felt a strange mix of power and despair. Power because I finally held the key to dismantling their deceit. Despair because the act of revenge itself was consuming me. Every moment spent planning felt like another piece of my soul being chipped away. But there was no turning back now. The betrayal had carved a void inside me, one that could only be filled by justice, or at least what I perceived as justice. I knew I couldn't simply confront Sarah with the evidence. Not yet. If I did, she might try to deny it or manipulate the situation to her advantage. No, I needed to orchestrate something far more devastating. Something public. Something irreversible. The idea came to me during a restless night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling. What if I turned their secret world upside down? What if I exposed them not just to each other, but to everyone they cared about? Friends, family, co-workers. All would bear witness to their shame. And once the truth was out, they'd have nowhere to run, no safe haven to retreat to. But how? Social media seemed like the obvious choice, a platform where secrets spread faster than wildfire. Yet, I wanted something more personal, more intimate, something that would hit closer to home. Then it hit me, Daniel's apartment, that cozy little nest where they plotted against me, where they whispered promises of a future together. It would become the stage for their downfall. I began crafting an anonymous email, addressed to both Sarah and Daniel. The message was simple yet calculated. Meet me at your place tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. Don't tell anyone. This is important. To ensure authenticity, I attached the incriminating photo of them together. They wouldn't dare ignore it, not when the stakes were this high. My hope was that curiosity and fear would drive them straight into my trap. As I hit send, a cold satisfaction washed over me. The wheels were in motion. All I had to do now was wait. That evening, I arrived at Daniel's apartment building well before the appointed time. Dressed in dark clothes and wearing a baseball cap pulled low over my face, I blended seamlessly into the shadows. From my vantage point across the street, I watched as lights flickered on in his third-floor unit. He was home. Minutes later, Sarah appeared, slipping quietly through the front door of the building. She looked nervous, glancing around as though expecting someone to leap out and accuse her. Her hesitation lasted only a second before she disappeared inside. Perfect. I gave them 10 minutes, enough time to settle in but not enough to grow suspicious, and then made my move. Crossing the street, I entered the building and climbed the stairs silently, my heart pounding with anticipation. When I reached the door to Daniel's apartment, I paused, listening intently. Muffled voices drifted through the wood, confirming they were both inside. Taking a deep breath, I knocked sharply 3 times. There was a brief silence, followed by hurried whispers. Then, the door cracked open, revealing Daniel's wary face. "Who is it?" he asked, squinting into the dim hallway. Before he could react, I pushed past him, stepping into the apartment. Sarah stood near the couch, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, clutching the edge of the coffee table as though it might steady her. "Saving you the trouble of lying to me anymore," I replied coldly, pulling the printed photo from my jacket pocket and tossing it onto the table between us. Or should I say saving myself? They exchanged panicked glances, their guilt written all over their faces. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of the evidence hung heavy in the air, suffocating them and me. Finally, Sarah found her voice. "Please," she begged, tears welling up in her eyes. "Let me explain." "There's nothing left to explain," I snapped, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You made your choice. Now it's time for you to live with the consequences." And with that, I reached into my pocket and pressed play on the recorder I had brought. Their earlier conversations, captured unknowingly during my surveillance, filled the room. Every lie, every whispered promise, it was all laid bare for them to hear. By the time the recording ended, they were visibly shaken. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, while Daniel paced back and forth, muttering curses under his breath. "You can't do this," he said finally, turning to face me. "You're ruining lives." "Ruining lives?" I shot back, my voice icy. "You mean like you two did to mine?" Neither of them had an answer. The next morning, I uploaded the audio file and photos to a private online folder, along with a detailed account of their affair. Then, I sent links to everyone who mattered, their families, friends, colleagues. By noon, the story had exploded, spreading like wildfire across social media and workplace gossip chains. Sarah tried calling me repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails begging for forgiveness. But I ignored them all. Let her suffer. Let her feel the same isolation and humiliation I had endured. Daniel fared no better. His freelance clients began canceling contracts en masse, and within days, his reputation was in ruins. Rumors swirled about his involvement with a married woman, painting him as the villain in a scandalous love triangle. For a while, I reveled in their misery. Each tear, each apology, it was music to my ears. Justice had been served, or so I thought. Weeks passed, and the initial rush of triumph began to fade. In its place came emptiness, a gnawing ache that no amount of revenge could fill. My days felt hollow, devoid of purpose. Work became mechanical, relationships strained. Even sleep eluded me, haunted by dreams of Sarah's tear-streaked face and Daniel's defeated expression. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of our now-empty home, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't healed me. Instead, it had left me broken, consumed by bitterness and regret. The man I once was, the kind, hopeful version of myself, felt like a distant memory. Was this really what I wanted? To destroy others only to lose myself in the process? In the end, I chose to walk away, not from the pain, but from the cycle of anger and retribution that had consumed me. I sold the house, packed my belongings, and moved to a small coastal town where no one knew my name. There, surrounded by the rhythmic crash of waves and endless horizons, I began the slow, painful journey toward healing. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness didn't come overnight, nor did peace. But with time, I learned to let go, not of the memories, but of the hatred that had poisoned my soul. I forgave Sarah, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to resentment was killing me. As for Daniel, I hoped he found redemption in his own way, though I never heard from him again. Today, I'm still rebuilding. Some scars remain, reminders of the life I lost and the lessons I gained. But amidst the wreckage, I've discovered something unexpected: hope. Hope that love can endure, even after betrayal. Hope that people can change, even when they've caused harm. And most importantly, hope that I can find happiness again, not through vengeance, but through forgiveness.